Okay, so the camera's rolling. Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Michael Stephen Crone. I was born in Altus, Oklahoma during the Second World War, right at the end. My mom was there with her family, and my dad was serving in the military in Florida at the time. I
So,
grew up in Tulsa.
I didn't realize that you were born in Altus. I always thought that you were born in Tulsa.
No, my mother went to stay with the family while Dad was in the military.
So when did you actually move to Tulsa?
I don't know exactly the time after the military because my dad went to Spartan Aircraft in Tulsa after he got out of the military. So that's probably how we got there.
Mm-hmm. So today's your 75th birthday.
Yep, my
Yeah.
75th birthday today.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask some questions about your childhood. I wanted to learn some things about what you did for a living. I think it's a very fascinating subject that you worked in, a very important one, especially today. Why don't we just start a little bit with a little bit about how you grew up, what your family life, what school was like, what Oklahoma was like.
Okay. I went to a number of different schools. We moved several times in Tulsa from one end of the city to the other. So I spent most of the years at the same, I actually all the time in the same high school. I went to 3 different junior high schools and 3 different grade schools. My family was Church of Christ. It was the religion we followed, and it was the most important thing in our life. We never missed a service unless we were really sick.
What makes Church of Christ different from other Christian denominations? So let me ask that again. What makes Church of Christ different from other Christian denominations?
Well, it's probably would be considered more works oriented than some uh, Christian faiths.
What does that mean?
That means that what you do has a lot to do with your salvation as opposed to trusting in God for your salvation.
It's a little more like Catholicism.
A little bit more like Catholicism without the Pope and all the other accoutrements. But it's very similar in that you don't miss church for anything.
Did you stay in the church as an adult?
I did until I wasn't walking with the Lord during the military years. And then I came back when I was still in the military, and I moved to Rome, New York, and I rededicated my life to Christ before meeting Barbara, my wife.
Why did you go into the military?
Well, there was no choice. This was during Vietnam, and you either got drafted or you joined up, or if you were lucky, you pulled a lottery ticket. They had a lottery for those that would have to go in and those who didn't.
So, but you were an officer, right?
Yeah, I
So you'd
had
already.
actually graduated from college before going in, so I went to officers training school,
What was your degree in?
electrical engineering.
Why did you decide that?
I was just like, that'll be a good field to follow for the future, so that's why I did it. I was good in math and science.
And your dad was.
He was actually an airline mechanic initially, and then he became a manager and a planner for the Boeing 707s and the 747s for American Airlines.
Did he encourage you to go into electrical engineering? Was that
Yeah,
your idea?
he thought I should go into some scientific field.
What did he think about your music? Because you haven't mentioned that. You were in a rock band in college.
He liked my music. We used to practice there frequently in my house, and the neighbors would come outside and enjoy the music too.
What
But
kind
he
of
did
music were you playing?
mostly the era from 64 to 68 in that frame, which was a lot of Beatles, Stones, rock, soul music, did James Brown and stuff like that too. I played guitar and was the lead singer.
And your band was called?
The Breakaways.
What happened to your bandmates?
Well, our first drummer got out of high school.
All right, it's his birthday, so this is going to be happening a lot. Let me cut. Okay, so where were we? You were in a band called the Breakaways, and I asked what happened to your bandmates.
The drummer went into the military because he graduated from high school and wasn't going to go to college, so we had to get a different drummer. And the
Was this
band was
Gary?
very tight.
Was that Gary, the one
Yeah,
that
Gary
had the...
Austin was the one who went in the military, so we really missed him. You know, he had his problems in drumming,
Mhm.
but he was a really good guy, and we were a very tight group. We did a lot of traveling around the state and into Arkansas some.
What's a concert that you remember?
Well, the biggest concert was our second concert, which was called the Howdy Dance at Oklahoma State. It was the big mixer for the whole school, so it was like 5,000 students in this outdoor venue by the student union. It's a concrete venue, and then a big rainstorm came, a thunderstorm, and we had to grab all the equipment and move inside, and people helped us carry the equipment, and nobody stole anything. So that was a miracle. We got inside, and the first chord we played was Hard Day's Night, a big open G, you know, and that really, the dance was okay before we moved inside, but it was out of sight and inside. And then another big one was we went over to this little town in Arkansas for their graduation dance. We used to go to University of Arkansas, where Bill Clinton went to school, at and played fraternity dances there too.
So he might have been at one of those dances? Was this the
It
same
might have
time?
been one of his. He might have been at one of our dances. The lead guitar player still plays in Tulsa in a band called Midlife Crisis. They play the same songs and others that we did, and they make a lot of money. Play for about $1,500 a piece.
And then your keyboardist?
That's my brother-in-law Larry, and he married my sister, and they moved to California. But that was after the band had already broken up by then. Because I went in the military. Well, I moved to Dallas, Richardson, Dallas area when I got out of college, so the band had to break up.
So you, did he meet your sister through the band?
No, she met him through high school, junior high school actually. They dated for years.
Oh, so you met him through her.
Yeah, he was actually responsible for me getting in the first band I played at, the Mike McCutcheon band. I can't remember the name of it now, but my brother-in-law was really the one. They needed a lead singer, and he brought me in. I tried out and was taken.
So after, so the band, I'm sorry, I don't, you were saying that the band broke up when you went to college?
Yeah, when I went. No,
But I thought, when you
when I
went in the
went to
military.
work after college.
So what did you, after you got your degree, you went straight into officers training school, or you got a job?
No, I got a job at Texas Instruments and worked there for about 6 months, and they were trying to draft me, you know, and that's when I looked into officers training school, and then because I put in for a deferment, a draft deferment because of the work I was doing. It was classified type of work, and they didn't give it to me. So then I reapplied to officers training school, quit that job, and got another one, and went through the whole process again, and was denied again. But by then my officers training school had come through, and I took the test and went into the military as a, well, you go in as a sergeant, but you're an officer in training for 3 months.
What were you doing at Texas Instruments? It was classified, you said?
Well, some of the work they did was classified. I wasn't really working on anything classified at that time. I was working on operational amplifiers, which are very small little devices that can amplify signals and do things like that.
What were they being used for?
You find operational amplifiers in military equipment primarily.
So there wasn't any kind of computer work at that point?
No, I hadn't gotten into computers at all at that point. I didn't even take any computers in college.
But they had them there?
They had one basic course, but I didn't take it.
But this is like the era of punch cards?
Yeah,
Or
that's
they
the
already
era
moved
of
on?
punch cards.
And you weren't interested?
Well, it was business-oriented computing primarily. They had one class that I just couldn't fit into my schedule.
So what was officer training like?
Well, we had a stack of books this big we had to go through in 3 months. So it was harder than basic training for infantry, well, not infantry, but your enlisted men, because they didn't have to go through all that learning. We had to do that, so we had to stay up till midnight and get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do all the same things that military trainees would do that were enlisted.
So you had it was physically demanding, but then they were also keeping you up with study.
Right, so I ended up getting sick my last month, but I'd already passed my physical that they had you to go through, and already done the obstacle course, but you had to be able to go through that too. And I'd already done that, so they let me graduate anyway.
What were the books about? Was it like leadership, history, military tactics? What were you
Yeah,
reading?
all those things.
Was there anything technical at that point?
No, there was no technical, because your people in officers training school could be going into flying or something like that, so they're not even necessarily engineers. My squadron had all the engineers, but like we never could win the softball contests and things like that because they were all engineers, and not like all the pilots. The squadron with all the pilot trainees were all the jocks.
Did you have any interest in becoming a pilot, or you just
No,
weren't really interested?
I wasn't interested. I'd already been flying all my life because my dad worked for American Airlines, so we took a trip somewhere every year.
What's a trip you remember?
Uh, Going to Hawaii. Acapulco was a good one too, but Hawaii was awesome because I got to surf.
Is that the time you almost drowned?
Yeah.
You want to tell that story?
Well, my dad said, "Are you going to try surfing?" You know, because you could rent it was big boards then, not the little ones, long boards. And I was trying to decide if I wanted to do it, so I finally did, and I got aboard and without any lesson just paddled out there with the waves, and they were about 6 feet high above the surface of the water, good sized waves. And I watched the guys doing it, and I managed to paddle with them and caught a wave, and it was like I jumped up, and I'm standing there on this wave, and you can't hear anything. It's total silence because all the noise is behind you. And I'm going back and forth, and then I noticed that there was nobody with me anymore. And I looked, and there was some red flags, which I didn't know what it meant, but I decided to get off my board, but I couldn't stop it easily, so I just jumped off and tried to hold it, and it squirted out of my hand, but fortunately didn't go too far. And then another guy was behind me, and he fell off his board and almost hit me with his board, but he helped me get to my board, and I paddled in because I had swallowed about a gallon of water. I was on top of the um, corals.
That was there's a reef right there, and that
There's a
was what the
reef right
flags were
there.
for.
That's where the surfing is done. That's what makes big waves is reefs.
And was that it?
That was
You
it.
handed the board in?
I got enough. You know, I had done what I wanted to do, and I really didn't want to try it again. It'd been different if I'd had some friends and tell me where to go and what to do.
Now, I remember that there was, you rode a lot of motorcycles when you were younger, right? Because I remember some stories about that.
I didn't ride a lot. I owned a motorcycle for about 6 months.
And this was during college or when?
This is when I was in the military in Biloxi, Mississippi. I was an officer down there.
What was it, the bike?
Triumph
And you got rid of it?
650.
You got rid of it because what?
I was going to be restationed up in Rome, New York, and I had my car. I didn't have a trailer to haul it, so I just sold it. And that was the last time not the last time I rode one. I rode one with my brother-in-law Larry a few times.
Well, you rode my bike when I was in the military.
Yeah, I rode yours while you were in the military. Kawasaki.
Yeah, I used to take Jonathan to like guitar lessons on it, right? That's what I heard.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
Maybe I did.
That's when I was in Gitmo. Okay, so you went, so you did officer training, and then where did they send you?
Biloxi, Mississippi.
At that point, you were doing what kind of work?
I was writing installation packages for antenna for government, Air Force installations around the eastern part of the world. That included Thule, Greenland, Argentina, Newfoundland, Europe, but not South America. That was done by a different group.
So technical writing?
It was just, yeah, really just technical. This is what you do. This is how you put it together. I had to learn it because I wasn't trained in it, but you needed some electronics capability.
And from there you went, that was when you went up to Rome after that?
Yeah, that's when I went up to Rome they reorganized Eastern Georegion into Central, I can't remember what they call it now, but they reorganized and I was moved up to Rome, New York, Griffiths Air Force Base.
Yeah, which no
doing
longer
the same
exists.
kind of work. And at that time, I had a friend who had a book on Fortran 4 programming language. And in typical military installation, you have a lot of work for a short time, and then you have a lot of downtime with nothing to do. So I learned how to program on my own from this book. And from there, I got an opportunity to change to a computing group. We worked on the Wesley test site, which was a trailer full of the computer parts, which is a whole trailer full to be the equivalent of a little tiny computer of today, and not even the equivalent. It's very small.
What would you say it was, like a 386 processor or something? What could you
Less
get
than
out of
that.
that? Less than that. How much memory would it have?
It had 8K.
So you taught yourself to program, but you didn't actually have a computer that you could try out your
Right.
programs on. So it was all just in your head.
Yep. And then I got there, and they were using Fortran, so I was actually doing that programming. But I learned how to program in assembler language too, which was what was necessary for writing device drivers and special graphics devices that we had to support.
Can you explain what assembly language is?
Assembly language, in your computer you have memory, and language operates on that, the bits in the memory. You have a, like, load a register from a memory location, and once you get in that register you can multiply it times some other memory location, and then when you're done you have to put it back in. Everything is very small scope, and you put all that together you get a working program.
So it's just like a string of hex
Well, we
numbers
use
and letters.
octal.
I used oct because it was a
It was an 8-bit
8-bit. Oh, okay.
machine.
So it's just a string of numbers, and you put those into the machine with a punch card, or how did you actually do it?
We did a punch card initially, but then we had, in that place at the Wesley test site, we actually had a teletype, and you did your program in with a teletype. The advantage of punch cards is it lets multiple people see. Computers in those days were pretty much single user devices. So if you don't have punch cards, then there's nothing you can do until it's your turn on the computer. So we use punch cards for that purpose. And then eventually they came up with operating systems like Unix that allowed to have multiple people programming at the same time.
Because they'd be on terminals
They'd be on
that
a
were
terminal.
connected to the mainframe.
Right.
Do you remember the first program that you ever wrote and put into a computer?
Was given the task of writing simple multiplication and division and things like that in an assembler, which was, by doing it that way, is faster than what came with the system. So he gave me that, and then I had to write a device driver for a magnetic tape unit, the ones you see with the big reels. I wrote it so the device driver would read the information from the reel or write it back into the reel, depending on what you're doing.
How did you know how to do that?
I just read the book. They had better books back in those days. They had a big manual about how to do a device driver. And so I managed to do it.
So it was specific to each computer and
Yeah, the
Mac.
book,
So you had to kind of tweak something.
similar language is unique to every computer. They all have, it's all based on the processes that they have.
And then when did you actually start programming in a language that was, you know, like C or like a natural language? Did you ever do any Fortran programming?
Yeah, I did a lot of Fortran programming at the Wesley test site. And the big job there was we were working on early stages of AI called pattern recognition. And you had to, we were trying to determine how you could tell what kind of device, what kind of vehicle or plane was coming into your area. And I lost my train of thought there.
So you were using Fortran to...
Fortran was what controlled the process. It was the do this, do that, then do this, the logic. And the logic what we were doing was to convert signals, analog signals coming in, like the sound of a truck, the sound of an aircraft, the sound of a jet, the sound of a tank. They all have different sounds, and humans can tell what's what by just listening. And so what we were trying to do with pattern recognition was pull out features from the data, which was in analog, like a microphone, an analog, and convert that into digital, store it on the magtape drive, and convert it into digital, or leave it in analog and look for patterns that you could recognize.
So in those early days, did you have like an actual digitized audio file of a sound? or you would just take the features
No,
that
you got
were
to train it
salient?
yourself.
So you were working with analog signals, and you would how would like what was the interface? How would you analyze an analog signal digitally?
Te- tell Tektronix display. You look at it visually, and it looks like a bunch of waves.
Did
And
you guys make any progress with this? Were you able to
yeah, we
have it
did.
recognize what
Yeah,
the
we
sound
we
was?
were able to make progress with it.
So that was with Fortran, and then
An assembler.
an assembler. And you stayed. I guess we can get off of work for a minute. You stayed in. How long were you at Griffiths?
Uh, a couple of years, and then I got out of the military. I married my wife, Barbara, when I was a captain in the Air Force.
So how did you meet Mom?
Well, she'd be the better one to tell this story, but I'll do my best. Uh, her roommate was in the park, and we were having a, I don't know what you call it. The church had a bunch of teenagers from the South for a meeting during the week. We went out and met people, invited them to church, and then we had a preacher preach. And her roommate was in the park, and they met her, and she told them they could come to her place and she would study with them. Well, they showed up. Two girls showed up from Tennessee to Barbara's roommate's apartment, but she conveniently didn't show up, the roommate. And Barbara, being the nice person she was, said, well, you can talk to me. And they came in and ended up setting up study all week long, and she ended up accepting Jesus and being baptized. And I was the follow-up person for all the new converts. I had just recently come back to the Lord myself, and I had a Bible study with a few people, and Barbara was one of them, and I went to pick her up, and nobody else came to the meeting, so I said, let's try something different. So we went, played miniature golf, and that started our courtship.
And Mom had been raised a Catholic, right?
Yeah, she'd been raised a Catholic, and she'd kind of like walked away from the Catholic Church because they changed a lot of things. And she had a baby sister who died shortly after birth, who she had been originally taught was in, I can't remember what you call it in a Catholic.
Purgatory?
Not purgatory.
Oh,
It's
limbo.
Limbo for babies. And then they did away with limbo, and so she didn't.
Vatican II.
Right, so she left for that reason.
Because she felt
That they changed what was important, so how could she believe what they were saying?
And what happened with you? So you were raised in Church of Christ, and then you had a period where you weren't
Walking with
religious?
the Lord. And then I came back when I came to Rome, New York.
What happened in Rome?
I just decided to come back to Jesus. I went to church on Sunday, and they preached a sermon on the prodigal son, and I felt it deeply and came back to God.
And this was a Church of Christ?
Yes, Church of Christ.
Church of Christ. So Mom originally was going to Church of Christ with
Right.
you when you guys were first dating?
She was baptized. That's another thing. Church of Christ views the point of salvation is at baptism, which is a lot like Catholic Church. You know, you're not saved unless you're baptized in the Catholic Church.
So while you were working in Rome, you and Mom were dating, getting to know each other. What was she doing at the time?
She had just finished a year in college, so she was just working as a waitress to figure out what she's going to do next because she didn't have money. I think if I remember correctly, she was possibly going to be moving down to the Philadelphia area on scholarship. but we fell in love, and we ended up getting married in 6 months, and she didn't go. And I got out of the military and stayed in Rome for another year, worked at Power Technology.
Well, before we get into that, I thought you were in Thule, Greenland at some point.
Well, I just went on TDY,
What is that?
temporary duty,
Okay.
just for a couple of weeks. Argentina, Newfoundland, places like that.
So the Air Force is really your introduction to computers. And then when you got out, you went straight into a computer job?
Yeah, PAR was, I took over my own software. I worked at PAR and went back to the Wesley test site and started there again.
So you were a civilian, basically contracted to the Air Force?
Right,
And you were working on the pattern recognition and that kind of thing?
same thing. I did a lot of graphics work too, with like writing software that would let you create graphs using a terminal, Tektronix terminal. And one of the first programs I ever wrote was a heart for Barbara.
Was it made with ASCII characters, or was it like an actual line drawing?
Just ASCII characters.
On one of those green and white pieces of printout? I think I've seen this. No? Wasn't that?
I think it might have been on the, with printer paper, but I don't remember.
So the whole time that you were working at PAR, you were pretty much working on stuff for the Air Force?
Yeah, after a while they closed down the Wesley test site. I went to work at PAR, and that's when we started the AFES, automatic feature extraction system, which was putting a big system together that would eventually work on helping analysts determine what they're seeing on pictures.
And the application was for identifying enemy aircraft and things like that, or what was it for?
The application, one of the applications was to help the cruise missile type of device flying over have match what it sees against what's stored.
So it's targeting.
Targeting, right.
To make sure it's on course. Were people talking about artificial intelligence at that point, or was it still just kind of an idea in its early stages?
Well, they were talking about it. They had it, but there's only like 3 colleges that really did anything with artificial intelligence at that time. It's MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Berkeley.
So your job description at that time would have just been programmer, or what would you have called yourself?
I was an advanced development specialist of some sort, principal engineer.
And then, so this is like the house in Lee Center, right? Or on Elmer Hill Road?
We're on
The whole
Elmer
time
Hill
that you were
Road.
working there. Didn't you take me there as a kid?
We skipped our trip to Tulsa.
Oh, right, yeah, when I was born.
2.5 years in Tulsa.
Well, you had Audra first. And
right. And then you were born in Tulsa.
4 years after Audra. Did you guys waited because you had Audra and then you wanted to travel, or why did you wait 4 years for the next kid?
Well, it was only 3 years.
3.5, yeah.
No, when we started, it was only like 3 years.
Oh, right, right.
So we didn't wait that long.
Yeah, so what about Tulsa? Why did you go to Tulsa?
Well, sometimes you think that, where you grew up is the best place in the world. So I went and interviewed at Amoco Research when we were on a vacation with my parents, and they offered me a job. They were working using the same kind of computers that I had, were DEC computers, and they were doing oil exploration with him, and I worked on that in
Was
that area.
was it a lot more money because oil?
No, it wasn't any more money. It was about the same money, but it was cheaper to live in Tulsa than it was in the Northeast
So you had that job for a year,
for 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Oh, because I only lived in Tulsa for a year, right? I was born about a year and a half after you moved there.
Right.
I see. And why did you leave Tulsa?
Well, Barbara's mother had cancer, and they needed help back in Rome, and we decided that we'd go back and help as much as we could. I'd actually been accepted in a preacher's school, and I was going to be a preacher in the Church of Christ, and we had support from the church and everything, but we just felt like God was calling us back up there, and I believe He was, not just for that purpose, but to help us get out of the shackles of some of the fundamentalism of the Church of Christ that was not as desirable as I liked.
What was it about the Church of Christ that bothered you?
Well, they didn't believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit or the Holy Spirit for today, really. There was not a lot of life in that walk.
Has that changed, do you think?
It probably has some places.
So you went back to Rome, and you got your job at Par back, the same
Yeah, I
thing?
got my job at Par back and worked on a lot of graphics programming initially, and then I was working on the AFIS project I mentioned, the feature extraction system to help the Defense Mapping Agency people.
And all this stuff was classified,
Yeah, it was classified.
since declassified, I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not telling anything that's classified.
Oh, so there are things that you know that you still can't say?
Well, I don't think it, I think 25 years is a limitation on classified information unless it's reclassified.
Why do you think some of that stuff was classified? It was just because if the Russians got a hold of it, it would give them, an edge or something, or
I don't really
are there
know.
national security issues involved in some of the stuff that you worked on?
Well, imagery is often classified.
Oh, so it would be like images of foreign countries.
Yeah,
I see. What was the resolution back then of these images?
the best you would get would be probably 700 by 1,000.
Oh, so it's still way better than a TV, right?
Yeah, still better than TV.
So you kept working at Par for how many more years? Because we left. When did we leave? 80?
We left in 82.
82. Okay, so I've been 7. And why did we leave?
I was not being paid well enough at Par for the kind of work I was doing and the kind of knowledge that I had. So I looked into HRB Singer and a couple other places, and they offered me like 40% more money to do the same thing.
What were the other places?
Well, Schlumberger was one of them that was down in Houston,
Houston.
and they actually offered me a job, but I didn't get the information in time, and I accepted the one at HRB Singer instead.
But you wouldn't want to live in Texas anyway because you're
Houston
from
is a
Oklahoma.
miserable place to live, humid and hot, more humid than Florida. Then you got your hurricanes. That's a serious hurricane area.
So we moved to
State
State
College.
College, Pennsylvania, and you were also proctoring courses there, weren't you,
Actually,
at Penn
I
State?
taught computer science course at Penn State. the beginning course that everybody had to take. I did that for like 2 years.
Did you ever think about, because at that point you only had a bachelor's
Bachelor's, that's
degree
all I ever got was a bachelor's.
with everything that you've done, yeah.
But everything I did was in a new field, so it made it like as if I was advanced degree person.
What were you doing at HRB Singer?
Well, that was satellite oriented and definitely classified.
So this was when you got into Star Wars missile defense?
Yeah, that's that area, general area.
Can you get a little more specific, or?
Not really a HRB Singer. That was more of the internals of a. Actually, my work, I helped, or I was in charge of developing an expert system for close air support, which is what they call support for troops on the ground.
Right. What's an expert system?
An expert system is a system that tries to make decisions like humans can make, and it's what makes it different from other programs is that the data and the code is separated. I don't know how to explain that easily, but
And that was a new idea. I mean, everything's like that now, right? Where you have a database with a program, or you mean something different?
it's a little different than that, than a database. We had databases then too.
So the idea is that the
data controls what happens. You change data and it makes a program do certain things, as opposed to changing logically in a program to tell a program to do something. And one of the things it does is change the environment, the data environment, and that just keeps happening until you get the solution.
do you arrive at
And
like
it's rule
general?
based.
Uh-huh. No, I remember. I mean, we did this. This was my
Science fair
fifth
project
grade,
in Florida.
sixth grade. Yeah, science fair, fifth, I think it was. We went to a fire marshal.
Right, and got
and
his
interviewed with him.
expertise, and you created a rule base and a language. A rule based language is not the same as a procedural language. You tell it what state to see, and it does things in order and comes up with an answer.
So the difference then is there's almost like an environment, like in a video game, a bunch of variables indicating what's going on in the world, what's changed and what hasn't, and then the rules are how what govern how the character or the player interacts with that state, with the state of the world.
Yeah, it's more a thinking of the state of the environment.
Is that approach still used today?
Yeah. If you're working on AI, it would be.
And you were programming in Lisp with this, right?
I did some Lisp programming.
Well, when did you get into C? Because that was the language
That was
I remember.
actually at par when I went back to from Tulsa. The feature extraction system was all written in Unix, on Unix, in C.
How different was C from what you had programmed in before?
It was different, but a little more knowledge of the environment than you would have in Fortran.
Did you enjoy programming?
Oh yeah, I loved it.
What did you love about it?
I don't know, I just like to have the computer do what you tell it to do.
Did you ever program anything just for fun?
Not really.
Never wrote a game? Well, I mean, the thing for mom.
I just helped you with that C-based game in Florida.
Yeah, I remember. I was trying to make my own Nintendo game. with ASCII graphics,
Right.
inspired by NetHack. Um, so C programming became pretty much the only language. That was almost the only language you worked in for most of the rest of your career, right?
Yep.
Why did it become such a
But I
dominant language?
developed my own tool called Copes, which was written in C.
Wasn't that in Florida?
That was in Florida. That was written
We'll
in
get
C.
there. Yeah, I definitely want to hear about that. But why was C so important? Why did it become this, even today, C++
Well,
or
C++
C sharp
is the big thing today.
or C sharp? But why? What was it about that language that made it so versatile and long-lived?
Well, it lets you program at a low level like assembler if you wanted to, and at a high level like Fortran if you wanted to do that. So it was a spectrum of ways of behavior.
What does that mean at a high level? High level versus low level. How would you explain the difference?
A low level is dealing with like assembler language, is dealing with the bytes and bits of the environment, of the memory. A high level only deals with an abstraction usually of the environment.
So you can have more or less control depending on how much you know. It's like
Right,
advanced configuration options.
right,
It's like high level would be having a Macintosh where everything's kind of done for you, but there's not a lot of ability to tinker with the machine. And then with a PC, you can kind of go in and change every single thing,
right.
make that difference. So you were in HRB Singer, and we were in State College for 4 years,
3.5.
3.5 years. And what happened then?
Then we just decided to look for another. Oh, they wanted us to move to the Washington D.C. area without paying any more money.
You were going to telecommute, or what was the idea?
The idea was to move us down there. They
Also,
wanted,
HRB Singer had an office
yeah,
there. And at this point, by the way, you had 4 kids.
right.
So Lydia had been born in...
Jonathan was born in
Lydia was
State
born
College.
in Rome?
She was born in Rome.
Yeah, and then Jonathan was born in State College right before we left, right?
Right.
Yeah. So they wanted you to go to D.C., and this was all the missile defense stuff, so it was very government related. You
Right.
had like top secret clearance.
Yeah, like a radar site, missile, satellite site that analyzed the information coming down from outer space. It wasn't going to be interesting work either.
So you decided,
I decided to look for AI work, and I put my name out there and got contacted by the group down at Harris Corporation in Melbourne, Florida. They were actually in Palm Bay at the time, and brought me down. I showed them some things I had done and written in Lisp. I showed them the expert system, the close air support expert system we did there. Talked to them about my work in imagery, because I didn't really mention much of that. Advanced pattern recognition was to apply AFIS, this is back in PAR, to deal with imagery. So like you want to describe a picture, you can think of it as objects that exist next to each other, like a bridge is a concrete square connecting two pieces of earth, that sort of thing, with water running under it.
so those are the kind of abstractions that the system was trying to extract from visual information.
Right,
So then you would have a way of tracking each of those things. So you know what is Earth and you know what is bridge, even from different angles. And
right. And
how
if somebody
successful was
asks you
that?
where is where's a likely launch going to take place. You could use this system to determine that.
What would I mean? How would there are just certain features that make a place amenable to launching rockets, or what's the idea?
Well, I just used launch. I don't know, the presence of something unexpected.
So you were able to show all this stuff to the guys at Harris.
And they offered me a job, a good job, and I worked down there. And that's where I did most of my SDI related work,
What's SDI?
Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, and worked on space station, wrote expert systems from both those areas, worked on space station, then,
What did you do for the space station? I didn't know you ever did that.
yeah, we had research projects in 3 different divisions, and I was the head of those 3 different groups. There were only a few guys in each group. They were working on, one was working on trying to analyze electrical problems on the space station, if it happened.
When did the space station go up? I thought this was later.
No, this was before the space station. This is just theoretical, conceptual.
So were they actually building something and testing it on Earth at that point? Or was
Yeah,
it all just
it was
conceptual?
all big project for NASA. They had all the government contractors like Boeing and Harris, McDonnell Douglas, those kind of companies were all working on pieces of it. And then I had a rule-based system to support guys who wanted to send data from the space station down to be recorded at a high-speed recording device, that sort of thing. Those were written in a language called ART, which was an AI data rule-based language.
And that was when you started with COPES?
That's when I started with SDI, or Star Wars, which with Brilliant Pebbles was the actual project. That was the idea of having these little satellites that was weaponized in circles, concentric circles around the world. So if anybody tried to launch, you could shoot them down with these brilliant pebbles. And I created COPES, the Constraint Propagation Expert System, to work on that problem, like a network problem, a state. And when you do one network problem, it lends itself to something else, and we eventually moved into the train area, scheduling of trains.
What was the problem exactly that you were trying to solve
Which one?
with Brilliant Pebbles? It was like a traveling salesman kind of problem, or was the idea to get the signal from one place to the other with as few steps as possible? What was the real?
We had that traveling salesman approach as part of it, but it was what you do when you have an explosion, how you recover the network, reconnectivity, that sort of thing. So it's a simulation of the whole environment, plus what happens if you make things go wrong, blow something up out there. How do you maintain and this is a lot like is done on the internet.
If a node goes out.
And how do you send the data to the eventual recipient? You have to reorganize, reroute. But you don't want a centralized routing algorithm. You want a distributed routing algorithm. And that was what made ARPANET so important.
Was that if something went down, there would always be something else that could
Your
take its
data is
place?
never going to get lost. It'll always be found, and it'll eventually get there to its right address.
So how did COPES address this problem? And this was something that you created, it was your own
Yeah,
idea?
it's something I created. It just made an environment for easily defining how a network of anything would work. It's like you don't have to write it from scratch. You've got built into it the ability to communicate across nodes in this network. Yeah, we moved up to Erie to get out of Florida. We really hated the environment. It really bothered your mom's allergies. She developed some severe problems down there. So they let us move up to GE, let us move up here, and eventually I became a full-time GE employee and worked another 8 years, I think, here with GE before getting laid off. And then went to work at a company called FIS from home. I worked for another 8 years from home on software dealing with business systems, ATMs and that sort of thing.
Well, you have a bunch of patents. What are they for?
They were associated with the space station, with Star Wars.
Are those the projects that you enjoyed the most, that you're the most proud of, or is that just a random thing that they happen to be patented?
Well, I enjoyed them a lot. That was they were based pretty much on the expert system we developed for space station, not Star Wars.
What about music? Did you keep playing all those years?
I did. I kept playing my guitar and singing pretty much in church environments, praise teams, and sang with your mom. Lots of times at different churches we'd sing. Music was very important in our family. Everybody's musical. And
Yeah,
my
there's a couple.
family is the most important to me outside of God. Then my wife and children are and grandchildren are the most important thing in my life.
Could you talk a little bit about kids and grandkids? Tell a little bit about them. Skipping me, of course.
I'm not going to skip you. Well, Audrey was, I don't know how to, I always think of the home movies we have of her running into the room saying "Daddy" when she's only about 3, and her joy that she had.
This was Super 8.
Yeah, I have a lot of Super 8 video without any sound. She was a very creative person, and she, one time when she was about 3 or 4, wrote a song on the piano when I came home. It was about Mommy burning the potatoes.
I don't remember that. Oh, she would have been, yeah.
She's very smart. All of my kids are smart and accomplished.
What's she doing now? I mean, I know, I'm just asking for the audience.
She's, as far as I know, she's still working on her law degree. She's in law school and completed 2 years, I believe. Have to mention you. You're a person who was gifted in so many areas, it was difficult for you to find which one you wanted to do. You're gifted artist, writer, musician, singer, and scientific area too, computers. You could have gone into any one of those fields and been highly successful. Then there's your sister Lydia. She was always a good student, a tremendous athlete, a great singer, and a great mother too. Then there's Jonathan, the youngest son, with his family. He's a successful musician in Nashville and engineer, producer, all aspects.
Because you worked in AI most of your life, you've got to have some ideas about the direction that the technology is headed. Do you see danger more, or do you see promise for the future? How do you look at the work that, and how do you assess your role, the role that you've played in contributing to the development of all these technologies that are such a part of our life now?
I don't know how much of my work had an impact. The only time it ever was outside of the company really was when I worked with Berkeley on a system of a AI-based network manager for packet of transmission.
But I would think that just
Well,
like
I
the
guess
internet started as a defense network and then it became privatized, I would assume that some of the work that you did eventually ended up
it's
contributing.
possible,
You know?
but so much of the work that we did was so early on that it may not have actually made it in itself, but it may have influenced.
So when you were involved in it, do you now see it as any kind of a danger to humanity? Did you see it that way at the time?
I didn't really see it that way at the time. I do now. I think that we've already experienced the areas of data collection and analysis that can change our lives. The monitoring that goes on by companies takes away the freedom and rights of individuals, I believe.
What about artificial intelligence kind of usurping the roles or taking jobs from human beings? I'm a case in point with translation. I mean, there's less and less work now because of AI translation getting so good that all they want to hire people to do now is just to correct machine translation, with exceptions,
I
obviously.
know. I don't know what the answer there is, because if you take it on a strictly capitalistic perspective, then saving money, making money is justification of itself. If you take it on a more socialist basis, then it was probably going to be misused and take away freedom. So I think that you can't really stop it.
Genie's out of the bottle.
The genie's out of the bottle now, and they've gotten so good
So are you in favor of, well, for example, if whole industries basically become computerized, there's like no need for anything but a few workers in a given factory or something like that at some point. We're not far from that, I don't think. Are you in favor of there being social compensation that's given to, you know, the numbers? Because there's going to be massive layoffs, right? I mean, there just won't be enough work unless it's working on the AI and programming. But what about people who don't have the brain power to work in that field? Do you have...
I'm opposed the basic roots of socialism, but I don't know how we're going to. Maybe there'll be a massive war, reduce the population, maybe a pandemic. There's no way to predict what the overall effect of AI will be on. I hesitate to say I'm in favor of social decisions in government to pay people just to exist. I don't think that that it's justified to pay people just to exist. They need to figure something out.
breaking big rocks into little rocks?
Yeah, well, there's you got to come up with something that's beneficial to society.
Do you think that there are areas of human intelligence that computers will never be able to surpass?
I think there are. I don't think that they have the ability to go very deep in abstraction.
So you don't think there's a danger that human beings as a whole will just become obsolete at some point? There won't be anything that we can do that machines can't do better, and they'll just keep us around as long as we program them to?
Maybe we have to, when we get to that point, maybe we have to reevaluate the machine environment. Of course, then you got...
It's too late at that point.
Then it's almost like Schwarzenegger's Terminator movies. The machines control it.
Do you think that's a likely scenario, or do you think there'll be safeguards imposed before it's too late?
Well, I don't think that there's going to be that kind of change without God's interference. I don't know how it fits into his plan of the eventual end of the world.
So why is God real to you?
What I was going to say is that ever since I was a little child, I believed in the presence of God in my life and that he was calling me to be something different. Well, I can't explain it, but I know that I've always felt his presence in that way. That was one of the things that was different in the Church of Christ.
So as a young man, you felt called?
As a young child, just a kid in grade school, I felt the call of God in my life, not to be a minister or something like that, but just to be different. I knew I was different.
Was there an incident, an event, something that you remember? A moment of like an epiphany or anything? Or?
No, I can't recall anything specifically like that.
Later in life?
Yeah, my coming back to the Lord in Rome was a very special moment. The way I met my wife, Barbara, was directed by God, I believe.
But you had come back to the Lord before her, before you met her?
Yes, I had.
Was there something that happened specifically?
I just had the, I went to church and heard the sermon on the prodigal son and felt like the prodigal son, became the prodigal son, and I returned as he did. I can say I thank my parents a lot for the faith that I have. My dad for his understanding of the Word of God, his dedication. My mom for the metaphysical, if you would. She made God real to me. In a way that my father probably didn't.
So he was the head and she was the heart?
Yeah.
Who were some other important influences in
My
your life?
grandfather Little was such a nice person. You know, I loved him so much. I would look at times when we went fishing and stuff like that as some of the best times of my life.
And he was a musician, right?
Yep. He played in the band.
Can you tell the story about how he met your
Grandma?
grandmother?
Well, I don't know if I know the story, but he was playing with his band, and she came to the dance, and he just went up to her and said something like, "You sweet thing."
That was, well, hello, you sweet thing.
Or,
Right?
"Hello, you sweet thing."
So that was, yeah, I've told that story many times. I just wanted to get it for the camera. Um, anyone else like later in life, like a pastor that was influential, or a professor, a higher ranking
The
officer? Anyone?
professor that was influential would have been I can't even remember his name now. He was a professor of psychology at Penn State University. We used to meet for coffee at least once a week and talk about AI and that sort of thing, but we also talked about religion.
He was religious?
Yeah, we went to church together. That's how I knew him.
When you look back on your life, what are the things that you're the most proud of?
Well, I'm most proud of the fact that I was able to keep with Barbara's help, mostly Barbara, keep my marriage together and be a father and for all my kids throughout their life, not have to leave them in a broken home. the moment in time that she knows I feel this way too, that it encapsulates how she jumps off the page of existence to me as a special being was when she was walking down the street coming from our friend's house. She had this gold outfit on, this corduroy, and she just was embracing the world as she walked. That was the kind of person she was, or is. She reached out to everything. She touched everything. I can't imagine life without her because of the joy that she brings to me. I mean, there's obviously we got our problems, and right now with all my physical ailments, it makes it difficult for her. She's got so much more on her plate. But whatever she does to the utmost. She's teaching right now in grade school through high school and a college course. And she's already gotten praise from students, feedback. I know those kids will remember her for the rest of their life as a joyful person. She's artistic in a unique way. She can do anything, whether it's artwork or music, dealing with people. She's just a wonderful person, and I love her dearly. That's all I have.